Today I'm going to walk you through the process of creating this mandala on this heart-shaped stone. So the first thing I had to do was to try to find the center of this thing. So what I did, I just kind of eyeballed it, and I used a compass to kind of check, because this is going to show me if I started my mandala here, this is where it would end. It actually looked pretty good for me, so I just kind of went with it. I did decide to draw this one line going down the middle so I can just make sure that the mandala lines up perfectly from top to bottom, because on this shape it's going to be very obvious if it doesn't. So I wanted to make sure that I had that true line there to just kind of keep me on track. Next, I just load this dot up with a lot of paint, and I use this needle to pop any air bubbles and to kind of smooth that out. Now, to make sure that I set this mandala up just right, I really took my time on this next row, just making sure that I had a point going from the top to bottom, left and right. And then I just ended up placing a dot in between those dots, and I realized that that lines me up perfectly with the curved parts of the heart, making sure that I will have petals going out in that direction. And I will also have a petal going to the very top and bottom of the heart. With the bottom of the heart being a little longer and having that extra space there, I knew I definitely wanted a point going in that direction just to kind of help me fill in some of that extra space. And from there, it just becomes this idea of, I really envisioned a mandala sitting within that first circle. And then I would just kind of figure out what to do with the rest of the space. And that was my plan. Not much of a plan, but that's kind of how I work, is that I knew that I just wanted a focal point for this piece. So building out this mandala in the center was just my focus. And then once I got this done, I can just kind of look at the space that I have left and try to come up with some ideas on how to fill that. So I definitely knew I wanted to do some walking the dots on this one, which is what I'm doing now. And in order to do this, I just load the dotting tool up with a lot of paint, and as I slowly move it down, I have less and less paint on my tool, creating smaller and smaller dots. Since I was going to make this part my focal point, I knew I needed to do something to make sure that it stood out, regardless of whatever I decided to do on the sides, that the mandala in the middle just kind of stood out. I really wanted to bring in this white to kind of outline and define this area, because I felt that it would kind of give it its own voice and just really separate it from the rest of the piece. After completing this first row of white dots, I realized that I just needed a little bit more definition to really make sure that this part really stands out. So I decided to switch it up and go with swipes on here, because I knew that that would really separate this area and help me to define it more. And in order to do that, a lot of times I just load it up with a lot of paint as in a dot, and then I will take the dotting tool and or a needle to kind of just slowly drag that paint around to create this swipe. And then that really just kind of set me up, because then I was like, okay, now this part's going to definitely stand out now. And then I had to start coming up with a plan for the rest of it. So I decided to go with these big blue dots, and then a last minute change, I was like, but what if I just make this into a swipe? So I just took a needle and just slowly dragged out just the center part of the dot, creating like this really thin line with the swipe. And then I was like, okay, now we're going to start building this out. And I did decide to go with walking the dots again, and instead of just going around the circle, I went around the swipe. When I do this, it creates kind of like a teardrop shape, because you're kind of just working your way around that dot and then down the swipe. So it creates this really unique shape, and it just kind of brought like a little aspect to the stone where I was just kind of like, okay, now I can see the way that this is going and how I want to work this piece. So I decided that I really wanted to just build out these petals, and I wanted to keep with this theme of like alternating the colors. I just really wanted this to be like a fun, playful, colorful piece. And I really had this idea of the mandala just kind of falling off the side. So I've done a few of these hearts before, and I always kind of end at this edge that I'm getting close to, and then come up with a different design kind of wrapping around the edge. But on this one, I wanted to just do like this overgrown mandala that is falling completely off the side of the stone. I just really wanted to see what that would look like, to just kind of have it like wrapped around the stone. So I decided to go with like these really big petals and just build out this section as much as possible, just adding more rows. And I kind of had to play around. When you start to get to the sides, it starts to get a little bit tricky, because you can see here that I'm already dotting some on the sides. But then when I get up to this section, I'm still completely on the flat portion of the stone. So I kind of had to play around with it and just see what would work, and just kind of adjust dot sizes and the swipe sizes to kind of just to fill in the space to make it all make sense and still look symmetrical. Once I got to this point, I knew I was definitely going to go in with some white swipes, because I was just kind of following the pattern that I already created in that first row of petals. And I knew it would just kind of help bring it together, and it would kind of help me to fill in some of these spaces. Because on some of these, you can see that like here at the bottom, the space is a little bit tighter. But once you get to the areas near the rounded parts of the heart, you'll see that you have more space to work with, but then here at the top you have less. So I kind of had to just kind of play around with the swipe sizes to try to just make it all look as symmetrical as possible. I really just had to pay attention to where I was on the stone and to figure out what kind of swipe I needed. So like here I have a lot more room, so I'm making them just a little bit thicker so I can kind of fill up that space more. Where here the space is really tight, so I'm making them just a little bit thinner. And here I have a lot of that space going out to the curve, so I made these like a little bit longer to kind of push them out a little bit more, just to kind of fill in that space. And then when you get to these little ones on the sides, they end up getting a little bit thinner and a little bit shorter because I just don't have as much room. So I just kind of had to learn to just adapt to the stone so that it would still look symmetrical and still have that same effect of the mandala like wrapping around the piece. So this is definitely where it became more of a challenging piece for me, but it was also a lot of fun just to try to figure out what was going to work in this space. For example, here I did decide to do another swipe, but instead of doing that really thin tail, I decided just to fill up the entire space with the swipe, just making a nice thicker shape. And it just kind of gave it a different look. And it really was just a trick to just kind of fill in all the space, and I can kind of adjust them easily for the different amounts of space that I have in the different sections. So it was a good way to kind of like fool the eye but while filling the space, making it look symmetrical, even though when you look closer, you realize not so much. And then I decided I was going to stick with that pattern of walking the dots next. And when I got to this part right here, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? Because this was really hard to get in that little bitty spot and walk the dots with the curve the way it is. But I just went very slowly, and it came along very well. I just kind of took my time, but like once I got to the side here, I'm still on the flat surface. So very easy, very quick to just do those. And then here you start to get really challenging because this right side is kind of on a curve where the left side is still going to be on the flat surface. So it's just kind of just playing around, adjusting to adapt to the piece that I'm actually working on. Next, I just kept with the whole theme of alternating the colors, going out to the blue, and then of course doing some more walking the dots with the white just to kind of bring it all together. And now I'm just kind of looking already at the space that I have left, trying to figure out like how am I going to finish this entire piece off. In the end, I just kind of just stuck with what I had done on the previous rows, and then I was like, then I'll just kind of look at it, evaluate, and decide from there where I need to go. So I definitely wanted to do the next row of white swipes, so I stuck with that. And I made sure like here on the curve section that these swipes are really thick because I have a lot of space right there in that curve that I'm going to have to try to figure out a way to fill in. But when I get like to the sides of the stone, I don't really have that much space, so it becomes this game of what can I do that's going to make it look symmetrical and kind of bring it all together, but it's not going to look out of place and kind of lopsided. So I just kind of had to play around with a couple of different ideas. In the end, I decided to go with like these really big swipes. This left me with a pretty large gap in between the two petals that I decided to fill in with a big pink swipe, kind of bringing that pink from the center back out to the side. And it also was a great trick because I could play around with the sizes of these. So if I had a lot of space, like on the curved part of the heart, I can make a bigger, thicker swipe and just kind of fill that in. And then where on the sides, where it is a lot tighter for space, I just made like a little bit of a thinner swipe. And it's not very noticeable because of the way it is wrapping around the stone. So it created like this cool effect that I was looking for with the mandala just wrapping and falling around the edge of the stones. In the end, it's a symmetrical, not symmetrical mandala, depending on how you look at it. I did go in with a bunch of different top dots, just using lighter colors on top to really just help brighten it up and just let all those sections pop. And that is how I created this piece. If you liked this type of video, just please leave a comment down below. Share on social media as I am trying to grow my channel, and let me know of any things that you would like to see in future videos. Thanks for watching.